all religious schools are equal, but some are less equal than others. This paraphrasing of George Orwell's parodic commandment typifies the thinking of the state when it comes to Hindu-run schools and educational institutions. The Right to Education Act, or the RTE, is the proverbial Moses staff that makes sure this commandment is obeyed. The RTE in itself is a worthy undertaking that states as its preamble, quote, an act to provide for free and compulsory education to all children of the age of 6 to 14 years, unquote. But in terms of discrimination, at once casual and concrete, very few acts match up to the RTE. The act was passed, of course, by the Congress-led UPA back in 2009. Tellingly, it remains in force in the present-day fascist Hindu Rashtra. As the saying goes, Sarkar bhale tumhari ho, system to hamara hai. Simply put, the RTE has and continues to destroy Hindu schools and institutions. Perhaps that is the overarching goal of secularism, to allow the prospering of every other religion, its belief systems, its way of life, its cultural values, its educational methods, its wisdom, its books and scriptures, except Hinduism. And after Hinduism is dead, we will remember it fondly and exalt its glory, like we do for every other extinct civilization and culture. This is what is taxidermy fetish. There are numerous provisions under the RTE that selectively apply only to non-minority schools. Like, for example, you cannot have a capitation fee or screen students you want admitted. The reimbursement of fee by the government is never timely, forcing the school to go under debt, even shut shop. You would have to have a government-mandated selection procedure for teachers, one that includes a quota-driven recruitment. There are several building and infrastructural restrictions and requirements that a school must comply with. The list is endless. But the overarching draconian provision of the RTE that is proving to be a death knell for privately run Hindu educational institutions is its order that 25% of the seats must be allotted to children belonging to the economically weaker sections, or EWS, and other disadvantaged groups. This does not apply to minority schools. So the onus of serving the economically weaker section of our society rests solely on Hindu-run schools and not on Muslim or Christian-run institutions. In 2017, 3 years after the heralding of the fascist Hindu Rashtra, the National Independent School Alliance, NISA, compiled a list of schools in 12 states that had been asked to shut down by the governments for non-compliance to the RTE's draconian provisions. And as the RTE primarily applies to non-minority schools, one can safely assume these were Hindu-run schools. As many as 7,000 schools in Maharashtra alone, the bastion of Hindavi Swaraj, the keeper of the Hindutva flame, had been told to shut down. We need to understand that the threat of closure doesn't just intimidate the school, it scares the pupils and the parents too. It has been 5 years since NISA implored the center to relook at the RTE and ease the draconian anti-Hindu strictures. The Hindu Rashtra government is silent. Now, as the famous lines go, जिसका कोई नहीं उसका तो खुदा है यारों, ये मैं नहीं कहता, किताबों में लिखा है यारों. Which book, you may ask? Well, in a secular nation, we only have one book to fall back on. So let us look at our constitution. Because if discrimination is cast in stone, we must at least examine the stone. The stone to begin with is Article 30. I now quote verbatim. Article 30, 1. All minorities, whether based on religion or language, shall have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. 1A. In making any law providing for the compulsory acquisition of any property of any educational institution established and administered by a minority referred to in Clause 1, the state shall ensure that the amount fixed by or determined under such law for the acquisition of such property is such as would not restrict or abrogate the right guaranteed under that clause. 2. The state shall not, in granting aid to educational institutions, discriminate against any educational institution on the ground that it is under the management of a minority, whether based on religion or language. I'm wondering if the same guy who wrote the Constitution also wrote the Waqf Act is as difficult to understand. But a direct fallout of not only the stricture of this article, but its words and composition is that Muslims, a majority in Kashmir, Sikhs, a majority in Punjab, and Christians, a majority in Nagaland, are still considered minority and can run their schools that will not be subject to the RTE. What's going on here? Let us now look at the toothless Article 28. Toothless because both the central and state governments have discovered enough loopholes in it to violate this article at will to placate their vote bank. The article states: 1. No religion instruction shall be provided in any educational institution wholly maintained out of state funds. 2. Nothing in clause 1 shall apply to an educational institution which is administered by the state but has been established under any endowment or trust which requires that religious instruction shall be imparted in such institution. 3. No person attending any educational institution recognized by the state or receiving aid out of state funds shall be required to take part in any religious instruction that may be imparted in such institution or to attend any religious worship that may be conducted in such institution or in any premises attached thereto unless such person, or if such person is a minor, his guardian has given his consent thereto, cultural and educational rights. Couple this with Article 26 of our Constitution that ordains, please bear with me because if I had to suffer this, I want you to suffer this as well. छोड़ूंगा नहीं, मैंने ये पढ़ा है तो. Article 26, quote, freedom to manage religious affairs subject to public order, morality and health, unquote. And that, quote, every religious denomination or any section thereof shall have the right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes, to manage its own affairs in matters of religion, to own, acquire movable and immovable property, and to administer such property in accordance with law. Couple this with Article 26, 28 and 30 and read both articles side by side and you will realize what you're up against. But I run ahead of myself because let me now read clause 5 of Article 15 of our Constitution that was brought in by the UPA in 2006 as the 93rd Amendment. In Article 15 of the Constitution, after clause 4, the following clause shall be inserted, namely 5. Nothing in this article or in subclause G or clause 1 of Article 19 shall prevent the state from making any special provision by law for the advancement of any socially or educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes or the scheduled tribes insofar as such special provisions relate to their admission to educational institutions, including private educational institutions, whether aided or unaided by state, other than the minority educational institutions referred to in clause 1 of Article 30. Now, Article 15 that prohibits discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth already had clause 4 that allowed states to make special provisions for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, but it did not exclude minority institutions. And that put the onus on the minority to also contribute to the society and work towards the upliftment of our socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And I'm sorry, this was unacceptable to the Congress, as well as, I must add, the BJP, because this amendment was passed with the latter's support. I hope you can see it very clearly now that it is this 93rd Amendment which is the staff meant to establish the commandments of Article 26 and 30. And it is because of the brandishing of this staff that the RTE does not apply to minority-run schools, barring a ubiquitous exception of a ban on corporal punishment that all Indian schools must of course compulsorily follow. To summarize the chain of events, the government applies RTE rules selectively to Hindu-run schools, orders them to maintain a 25% EWS quota, doesn't provide fee reimbursement on time, so much so that back in 2019, as many as 4,000 schools threatened to go on a strike against delays in fee reimbursement. And unconcerned, the government threatened the schools and blackmailed them with land occupancy provisions just to escape paying the reimbursement. The schools are forced to hike fee for all pupils in order to escape debt and closure. The fee increase forces Hindu parents to shift their children to other schools. More and more Hindu parents take their children away from Hindu schools, and these children are then welcomed by schools run by minorities. And by virtue of the religious obligations and directive principles of the constitution laid down for the believers, where preaching, proselytization and conversion are religious duties, these children, Hindu children, are inevitably, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly, put under pressure to convert. Meanwhile, the Hindu school is forced to close down. A recent report estimates that the RTE is responsible for the closure of more than 10,000 Hindu-run schools. A 2017 CAG report noted that the release of funds by the center to schools was sometimes delayed by as much as 307 days, almost a year. Such delays not only lead to outright closure of schools, they also result in abandoning any plans for expansion or upgradation of infrastructure. Ironical, because these are the criteria to be fulfilled by schools under the RTE. More importantly, even if the government pay the EVS pupil fee, albeit a year late, the school would still have to shell out for textbooks, uniforms, transport and other ancillary things every school-going child needs, especially when his parents are cripplingly poor. The authority that decides if a school is exempt from the RTE is the National Commission for Minority Educational Institution, NCMEI. This body, although is quasi-judicial in its directives, cannot have a Hindu as its member. In fact, the same enfant terrible BJP leader Ashwani Upadhyay filed a PIL. Kitni PIL file karoge? Sarkar tumhari hai. He filed a PIL seeking to challenge the NCMEI, the act, and to allow Hindus to be declared as minorities in states and union territories where they are, well, minorities. This is logical and rational, especially because it has wide-ranging repercussions on the survival of Hindu-run schools in these states and union territories. Hindus are now a minority in Jammu and Kashmir, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Punjab, Nagaland, Meghalaya, Ladakh and Lakshadweep. But one entity has opposed the BJP leader's petition, calling it frivolous. No, that entity was not the Congress or the church or Darul Uloom. That entity was the BJP central government. The BJP leader's own government called his petition, quote, untenable and misconceived in law, and told the court that the petition was, quote, not in larger public or national interest, unquote. The center, led by the Hindutva forces, backed by the same discriminatory National Commission for Minorities Education, NCMI, under whose act only Muslims, Christians, Jains, Sikhs, Buddhists and Parsis are listed as minorities. Following widespread outrage, the Modi government has only now asked more time from the court to rethink on the matter. Meanwhile, Hindu-run religious and linguistic schools continue to close under the burden of discriminatory RTE rules. The BJP leader Ashwani Upadhyay lamented, "हमें तो अपनों ने लूटा, गैरों में कहाँ दम था? मेरी कश्ती वहीं डूबी जहां पानी कम था. बट मैं अश्विनी जी की दाद दूंगा, ही इज नॉट स्विच्ड ओवर टू कांग्रेस. सो if there is only one thing more cruel than not allowing Hindu temples to run their own educational institutions without fear of state intervention and control, it is not allowing Hindus to run their own educational institutions without fear of state intervention and control. And if there is only one thing more cruel than the fact that both these cruelties are being subjected on the Hindus, it is that they are being subjected by the Hindus, belonging to a Hindu government in this Hindu Rashtra.